So we're going to try and have a bit of a conversation with you guys, and I appreciate it's pretty contrived up here on a stage, but there's plenty of good evidence for what I've just been talking about in a number of different organizations. So, Steve, I think the first thing I want to do, and thank you for putting these slides together just to kind of to show it, but I mean, obviously this shows your pedigree in the Lean Sigma role, but just a minute on some of the background of where you've come from a Lean Sigma perspective and your perspective.
Well, I came through college as an industrial engineer, and kind of IE 101 is process. And what do people do every day? And how do you simplify their process? And how do you make them more effective and more productive? And so my headset has always been around, how to simplify processes. And when Lean came around and Six Sigma came around in the early 1990s, it seemed natural for me to gravitate towards that. So I became an MBB with GE at the time, and I found a lot of value in what we were doing. But I also felt at that time that it was fairly restricted to the black belt, master black belt community. And it's always been a belief of mine that to engage more people in the process, not only on teams, but thinking about their processes every day, would make a more effective organization. So I've always had that mindset. I've always believed, to your point, work for a lot of people is a four-letter word. So whatever I can do to make my job easier is going to make my life more enjoyable. So it just seems like a natural fit for me.
Okay, so you've got plenty of experience around that, but I think for people to be able to relate to this, what would be really useful is if you, again, the slide's there for reference, but what I'm really interested in is, it's a 177-year-old company. I mean, really? Change? I mean, what's the real dynamic? What's the culture that's led to this?
Well, right now I'm with Cameron. I've been with them for about 3.5 years, and at Cameron, we are an old company. We trace our roots back over 170 years, and we build capital equipment for the oil field and for moving fluids of all types, air, oil, gas. But our culture is really one about change. It's really about advancing the operation, about growing people. We have a massive appetite for M&A, for example, mergers and acquisitions, and integrating those companies on a continual basis and trying to get them to understand the Cameron culture of change, the Cameron way of doing things has been a challenge. Obviously we have a number of brands. You can see on the chart there, we're known by a lot of different names, but the one thing we are known for is being a solutions provider for our customers. We like to think that when something goes wrong or something goes bump in the night, they can call Cameron and we can give them an answer. And in order to do that, we have to have rock-solid processes. We have to have people that know their jobs and are confident in doing what they do every day. And in order to do that, you have to have a good system.
Okay, and I think that tees up a very good discussion. And I think with the next slide I'm putting up here, my concern with this, and when I first saw this, is frankly, yep, makes sense. And when you described it, it certainly made sense. Yeah. But to be honest, so what? I mean, okay, all the things, the buzzwords on here, all kind of make sense. See them everywhere. So frankly, you've been around a long time. What's different?
Well,
so what?
I'm glad you like my PowerPoint skills, but which seems to be a prerequisite for everything nowadays. But here's where we're coming from. At Cameron, we put in place Six Sigma about 6 years ago. And we've always had that culture of training, and Lean came into being. And we've had teams and black belts and so on. What we were missing was true goal deployment throughout the operation. So that was a major gap. Another gap was sharing of best practices. We have 3 groups and 11 divisions, and they all, and I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but they all occasionally function as silos. And to your point, it's not only sharing best practices, it's collaborating on best practices, and we didn't do a good job of that. So we put together an organization, we renamed it Enterprise Excellence from Lean Six Sigma, because we were trying to drive change across the entire business. That was the first thing. The second thing was, as I mentioned earlier, we had a strong culture around black belts and green belt projects and teams. What we didn't have was everyone in a game. And earlier, Clark said something about engaging hearts and minds, and that was the gap I saw at Cameron. We didn't have all 18,000 employees engaged, so we wanted to do that. We focused them on what we call the 3 C's. No great revelation: cost, cycle, customer experience. But then how do you do that? How do you bridge that gap? And what I'm trying to show here is that we have a number of tools and applications that we give them to enable them to do that. Business process management, not only as an application, but as a philosophy, as a way of doing business. Nimbus, of course, as the application of choice, and then the Lean Six Sigma tools. So that's what we're trying to do. And everyone in the organization, through their goals, is aligned to the 3 C's.
Okay. Before we dive into some examples, though, I guess to be cynical for a second, Lean Six Sigma, pick up any book, any seminar I've been to, every project I've worked on, process is key. So why the business process management side to this? Because that was one of the questions that Clark asked this morning, and I'm sure it's still open in a lot of people's minds.
Well, I think 2 things. I mean, I said earlier that process has always been a kind of a pet project of mine, if you will, or a passion of mine. But again, how is it different? It's different in that, in my mind, much of the Six Sigma activity has been focused on projects, functions, this machine tool, that payment operation, etc. And trying to link all those results and all those efforts across the entire organization becomes extremely difficult. Trying to get finance to link up with sourcing, try and get sourcing to link up with logistics. You can optimize those individual processes, but until you optimize the handoffs, the linkages between them, you're going to fail. So we looked at business process management as one way of optimizing that entire system. And I know you're all struggling with that, or maybe succeeding more than we are. But that was our thrust, was to get the whole organization linked together.
Okay. Well, I know the other point here is a question, as I said at the beginning. It's a sequence thing. And I think it's really quite instructive. When I saw this, it made a lot of sense to me as to what's been the root of your success over the last couple of years. So if you could take us through.
I think this is not rocket science, right? One of the things is you've got to get people involved. You've got to have people talking about what they're doing and understanding the process. It's great to send in a Lean Six Sigma practitioner or an expert or an executive to say this is the way it should be. It's more important when the people in the process work through it themselves. So, it's a pretty simple philosophy. We start with a Kaizen. We process map on a wall like many of you do. We use the 8 sources of waste, a very simple philosophy, to lean out that process. And then we go back in with statistical tools through the classic Six Sigma approach to break the bottlenecks. As we do that, then we say, okay, well, what are we going to walk away from here? What are we going to have as a control mechanism? And all of you who use DMAIC know that maybe the most challenging part of it is the C, the control. And in terms of being able to document and train and make sure that you follow up, business process management applications like Nimbus are really, really valuable. So that's what we've tried to do. And again, we're trying to get all 18,000 people, I can't stress that enough, in the game through processes like this. Every manager is responsible for this, not just black belts, every manager.
Yeah, and I think, certainly when I've seen what you guys have done, the fact that you've got this to the point where it's deployed, governed, and audited, that's, as you say here, has really made a difference on the sustainability side.
Yeah. It's pretty simple, but I think it's very effective. And let me not kid anybody in the room here. we are in the early stages of this. We've been into it about a year now, year and a half. And it's a process. It's a journey. But I do feel good, very good, about the enthusiasm that it's raised and the solidification, if you will, of the processes that we come out with. Yeah. So it's been a good journey so far.
So if we go back kind of, because this side, using it in this way is over the last year and a half, but if we go back sort of 3 years ago with the catalyst that really drove this, I think it's worth having a look at a couple of the big projects that are...
Sure.
Because that's the point. People go, okay, so where do I start? How do I get off the dime here in terms of... And just very brief...
Well, there were two things that really happened. And the first one was what we call Project Neptune. We have a division called Subsea. We build subsea trees and control systems and so on. And a system, a field that a major oil company would go into involves a lot of pieces of equipment worth millions and millions of dollars and comes from many sources. We did not do a good job of managing all those sources, including our own factories, third-party suppliers, inspectors from the governments, inspectors from the customer, NDT, non-destructive test documentation, etc. It was kind of a nightmare. We decided that we needed an overall systems approach to this. And again, like an enterprise-wide approach, we were joining up all these different functions, all these different sources of input, and we needed a consistent output. So we launched Project Neptune. We also needed to go, in our customer's mind, from a product supplier of these pieces of hardware to a systems provider, one that could assure total integration across the board. So we put in place within Subsea this Project Neptune, which was launched on the Nimbus platform, but also used those Kaizen approaches that I described earlier. So far, again, we're still in process. This is not a done deal. But we learned from that this is possible. And you can see from the slide, we have over about 1,000 users right now, 50 authors, and this also spawned a thing that became what we call the BPM Steering Council, which I had. And we've taken this approach to all of Cameron. So that was our first foray into BPM.
Yeah, and I think you've said a really important thing, and I think it's common. I don't believe we have, well, I know for a fact, we haven't completed a BPM project in our entire 14-year existence.
Good point.
It's a journey. Just like Lean is a philosophy, it's an objective. So, it's out there, it's working, people are using it every day and stuff like that. But in the context of completion, that's an interesting thing. From a time perspective, I just want to have a look at a very different initiative, which I know is a very important one. Because again, I've been around ERP implementations for a long time, and again, core is process. You start on process.
Exactly.
So again, so what? So what's different about
this
area?
I mentioned earlier that Cameron acquires quite a few companies, and about 2 years ago, we made a major acquisition of a competitor, actually, who was operating on a different ERP system. We decided to bring them onto ours, which is SAP. And at the time, we said, you know what? We're not really using SAP correctly. We have a lot of issues with it. We have a lot of Z codes. I don't know if any of you use Z codes.
Custom codes, yeah.
Custom codes. We've got, I forget the number, 8,000 Z functions. And we decided, no kidding, and we decided we're not going to do that anymore. So we also decided at the time to not only relaunch SAP, if you will, but understand what processes we're trying to accomplish here and how do we do them best. So we named this effort Optimus. We assigned more than 150 full-time employees on individual functional teams: supply chain, finance, engineering, quality, logistics, etc. And their job was to do exactly what we talked about a moment ago: process map what they're doing, then look at industry best practices and how they apply in SAP, select the right one so that a minimal amount of customization is required.
Okay.
And that's where we are right now. We are in the process of getting ready to do our first launch, which will happen in April. And it's been a huge success. The other thing I want to mention is, as a result of this effort, this launched another idea. And this is this business process committee. We said, who's going to own these processes moving forward? It's great that we select an SAP model. It's great that we discuss this stuff. But if it ever needs a change, who's the authority? And we decided that we would have what we call business process committees. And the executives from each of those functions, together with subject matter experts, comprise those committees. Nothing can be changed within any of these models without approval from the BPC. And the BPC's job is to make sure that the approval they make fits all of Cameron, not just one group or one division.
Right. And that, to be clear, that's around the SAP side. So it's not that you're constraining, there's ongoing change continually in the manual processes around that.
True, but even on the manual processes where there is a policy change or a form change or whatever, it goes by the BPC.
That's great. So you keep even manual changes, as we showed, that's what happens. People go, oh, well, this would be great. This Lean Sigma project, we came up with this change, not realizing the impact it's going to have on
And truthfully, if we hear of a change, the BPC leader has to say to himself, in my case, I lead the manufacturing supply chain BPC. I have to say, is that big enough? Am I concerned that they're not thinking about all of Cameron here? And if I do, I bring it to the committee.
Great. Excellent. Well, just really a very quick summary then of so where do you go from here? I mean, you've achieved a lot. It's the beginning of the journey in some areas, along the journey in others. Just very briefly, what?
Well, I think where we are right now today is, first of all, we're in our annual review cycle for employees. And every employee now, and this is not true in the past, every employee this year will have their plans and goals aligned to the 3 C's. That's key. We want to get their hearts and minds around that objective. The other thing is, obviously, we continue to evolve and refine our Six Sigma tools. We recently launched some new training for green belts, as a matter of fact. We have decided to standardize on Nimbus as our BPM tool, or application, if you will, for all of Cameron. That was a big thing for us, and people are still learning about that. And relative to that, we're developing training both in our computer-based training modules and live training so that everybody gets a feel for how to do that. It's an ongoing journey. I can't tell you that the objective will be met next year or the year after. All I can tell you is we continue to evolve this thing, we continue to spread it, and it gains momentum every day.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure you've raised a lot of questions in the heads of people in here, and for time perspective, we kicked off a little late this morning, so to try and rein some of that back in, what I suggest is rather than Q&A, we actually, you'll be around the Nimbus area afterwards.
Absolutely.
And if anybody has questions, please, by all means, do bring in.
Be welcome to take them.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to do, though, before I bring the other guys up, I know you saw Carphone Warehouse and Best Buy speak in London, and actually you've used some of that in your ongoing discussions internally around, and which is when people see what's going on, it's going to be interesting to put those. So rather than have you take a rest, I'd actually really appreciate it if you could stay
I'd love to
here
hang around
maybe.
for that.
So that's great. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Excellent.